welcome to the Breakdown with Berckenhoff, episode 11. I can't believe it's already 11 episodes. While we wait for everything to load and I check to make sure we are all live on platforms, I will make a few quick reminders. Obviously, if you're watching now, you know the podcast is live. I do my podcast live on my DLive and Twitch at The Breakdown with WB and my YouTube channel at The Breakdown with Berckenhoff, as obviously that is my podcast name. And that gives me a good transition to, well, I'll finish my first point. And you'll know when it's live either through my Twitter or through my Discord, and you can find both links in the channel description at my YouTube of this video or the description where you might listen to on the podcast, such as Apple or Spotify. Excuse me. But this brings me to my second point I was going to talk about real briefly, and that is, well, I changed my channel name from Roundtable Decision to The Breakdown with Berckenhoff, obviously. And I did that for various reasons, but the main reason was marketing, as I just thought it was a better name. I introduced that the last week on episode 10, but I just thought it would be wise again to talk about that briefly before we get started in today's episode. And that also brings me to another good point of bringing up the Freedom Scoop Network, is if you like this sort of content or you want to check out more people that are kind of alternative news sources to your regular mass media coverage, you can check out the Freedom Scoop Network with Ed or with Stephen Ingaramus or the Generational Gap or R-Rated Conservative on DLive and whatever else. So if you do like this sort of content, I would highly suggest you checking out their stuff as well. But now that we got all of that stuff taken out of the way, or moved out of the way, if I can speak, we will get into today's episodes and or today's podcast episode. So just as I was doing my episode 10, I realized that, during the actual stream live on episode 10, Ed told me that President Trump got a positive COVID testing, because at that time when I looked up the articles and whatever else, I didn't see that his test was positive, but we were waiting for results about the whole test. And we know that COVID tests can come up with false positives or false negatives or whatever terminology you want to use based off of that. But that being aside, I learned live of the fact that he did test positive. So I thought that was a good place to start. And I just have this article from CNN about the testing live about 6 days ago, because now President Trump has gotten over COVID, even though experts do say that there's potential that you can get COVID virus again, especially at Trump's age, and he's not exactly a beast physically wise, but compared to Biden, you might say he's got a higher tier, but that's a whole side note in matter we don't really have to talk about here, at least in this part of the episode. But we know now that President Trump has gotten over the COVID-19 virus, but I just thought I would start there and go from there. But just in case, if you're realizing, Restream updated their settings on channel descriptions, so I'm not able to put the entire description that I used to put in the YouTube channel, but I'm going to post all these articles on my Discord server, and I might publish a Google Docs link that you can use in case you do want to read these articles for yourself, because I do think it's important you realize where I get my information from, or if you just want more details, because they don't always read the entire article. But that's kind of the point of a podcast, is summarizing news, so you may not even look at it, but I might do those things just in case. Now, this next article from the BBC News talks about how Trump is playing down COVID-19 and how he managed to overcome the virus. And we'll read. U.S. President Donald Trump has made a theoretical return to the White House to continue his treatment for coronavirus after a 3-night hospital stay. Mr. Trump is still contagious, removed his mask on the balcony of the White House while posing for pictures. His physician said he would continue treatment from there, and he may not entirely be out of the woods yet. Several of Mr. Trump's staff and aides have also tested positive for the virus in recent days. Questions remain over the seriousness of Mr. Trump's illness after a weekend of conflicting statements. On Tuesday, his first moving back to the White House, the president took to Twitter to compare COVID-19 to the flu. And that's another thing, as you can see if you're reading along here, he mentions the flu season in a quote. But the flu season is going to have a tremendous impact, at least I think could potentially have a tremendous impact on COVID-19. The flu in general still kills Americans despite having a vaccine that relatively works, at least at a higher success rate than many vaccines on the market. And that's a big thing to talk about and to think about. And we know about the flu. The flu has been around for many, many years, to the point where many people get vaccines or get flu shots, and it's just a regular part of their life and regular part of their routine. And that's something because the flu has been around. Influenza has been around for a long time. And COVID-19 is very new. So me being the novice health expert, I wasn't exactly sure how the health people were going to be able to know necessarily the difference between COVID-19 and the flu. Yes, there are testing, but if someone is desperately sick with the flu, because the flu can make you extremely sick. I've had the flu myself in one time. It was really bad, to the point where just walking you were terribly dizzy. And it was just a weird sort of out-of-body experience through having the flu. And obviously, I was very young at that point and relatively fit, so I don't think it really bothered me that much. But I was just very interesting to be a kid at like 13, 14 maybe years old and feel just as bad as I felt with the flu at that point. So I was wondering how health experts were going to be able to determine the difference, even if the test would take that question out of the matter. But in general, just health concerns and health people, how are they going to be able to calm the influenza season enough with COVID? Because COVID is still on a rage if you believe all the testing numbers or you believe numbers about the virus in general. So with these two merging together, it may become a very huge health risk or health concern for the American people. And obviously Trump was talking about that. And many of my family members are in the health profession, and I've been getting texts from numerous of them basically saying that, hey, Wyatt, you need to make sure you get your flu shot this season and whatever else. And I've already gotten my flu shot from all those texts and just general research and about the flu. But anyway, with those two coming together, it's more speculation or just me thinking out loud here, but I just was wondering how that was going to be handled. So I think I've kind of said that numerous times now, so we'll continue on here. Flu season is coming up, he wrote. Are we going to close down our country? No. We have learned to live with it, just like we are learning to live with COVID. The U.S. remains the country's worst hit by COVID-19, with 210,000 deaths and 7.4 million cases between the 1st of October 2019 and the 4th of April 2020. The flu caused between 24,000 and 62,000 deaths in the U.S. according to government figures. Mr. Trump's diagnosis has upended his campaign for the second term in office less than a month before the Republican president faces Democratic challenger Joe Biden in a presidential election. What happened during Trump's return? And it talks a little bit about some of the press videos he released when coming back, saying, I am I'll just read. Wearing a Navy business suit, tie, and mask, Donald Trump walked out to the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in Washington, D.C. suburbs on Monday evening, pumping his fist. After a short helicopter ride, Mr. Trump was pictured alone on the Truman balcony of the White House. He removed his protective face mask before giving a thumbs up in a military-style salute. So, real quick, and I talked about this on my last episode, and I just have noticed that this is a very common theme with all of these articles getting written about Donald Trump, because we do know that the media is biased, even if you don't like Donald Trump, and I'm not much of a fan of Mr. Donald J. Trump. But at the same time, you do have to realize, and it doesn't even take a rocket science, really. You can be the novice of a newsreader and be able to tell that the media is very slanted and very biased. And it's just interesting that last week they mentioned that, oh, by simply taking your mask off, you have ruined all of what has happened. And if you do look at mask studies, that is an actual correct term, because you do need everybody to wear a mask and everybody to do the right protocol in groups for it to actually be effective. Now, you're reducing, yes, but are you reducing at enough level for it really to matter? And that becomes the ultimate question about all of these mask wearing and why people choose not to wear masks and why people choose to wear masks, because it's ultimately about your personal safety. And some people say that the people who wear a mask are just wearing a mask because Big Daddy government has told them to wear a mask. And I do say that there is relative truth to that statement, because some people are just going to do what their government officials or what somebody above them or who they see above them is going to tell them. That's why there are leaders, and that's why there are followers, and that's why there are more followers than there are leaders. If you had more leaders than followers, the system wouldn't make a whole lot of sense within how we work as human beings and how in general our human nature is. We always look to that leader. We always look to that individual that we can follow. And there are a few alphas, for lack of better words, that are that individual that wants to be followed. And we go from there. So I just find it funny that people in these articles talk about the brief moment about mask and how it's just 100% wrong. Just absolutely, like, what are you doing? It's just funny because it's just it's hilarious, because you have several instances, and I'm going on a small rant here, but you have several instances where Joe Biden were to take his mask off when speaking to his political campaign. I believe this was actually in Kenosha, Wisconsin, where he took his mask off in a small gathering of people. And this was also the same press conference where the black lady went off script and asked him a question that she wasn't necessarily supposed to ask Joe Biden, because it seemed like all of them had structured questions to ask the Vice President Joe Biden. But that being said, that same event, Joe Biden took his mask off, and he even had comments about social distancing. He's like, oh, we're here, we need to make sure we're social distancing and all of that. Yet he took off his mask and started to walk down the pews of this church in front of people and actually pointing at people and like being very close to people when talking without his mask. Yet you didn't see any article really talking about Joe Biden's mistake for instantly removing his mask. So there is that side to the whole thing. And this is the last article we're going to talk about here as far as Trump and his battle with COVID-19. And obviously this COVID-19 battle is going to have tremendous impact on President Trump's campaign for what he chooses to do. A lot of what President Trump's strategy, and it always has been his strategy, because he's kind of a show boy, frat boy type of character, where he wants to go out and just show you everything. He wants to be the center of attention. He wants you to be the crowd in front of him. He's a show pleaser. He's somebody that likes the attention. So a lot of his campaign and his rallies gather so much people because they're interested in Donald Trump as a public speaker. They may not be 100% interested in his policies, because he is that charismatic to where he can speak and people will follow and will listen, or at least be intrigued enough to go and to his event. And he has attracted numerous amounts of people to his rallies. So the fact that he can no longer do that, and there hasn't been that much videos, campaign videos like live streams like Joe Biden did, although that was a disaster for Joe Biden, but that's besides the point. There hasn't really been that much campaign stuff in these past few days from Donald Trump, and obviously that was probably because Donald Trump wasn't feeling too well with the coronavirus virus, because there were several different strains, or at least there seems like there are several different strains of the virus, and Donald Trump isn't a super young individual, so the fact of him having the virus could potentially set his campaign completely down, and I think it has done that in the past in the past couple days. And seeing Joe Biden's response to it is interesting too. Now, this next is from Time magazine, and it states, "You are going to beat it, how Donald Trump's COVID-19 battle has only fueled misinformation." Less than 24 hours after requiring supplemental oxygen and being hospitalized for COVID-19, President Donald Trump was already talking about the virus in his past tense. I learned a lot about COVID. I learned it by really going to school, Trump said in a video filmed from his hospital suite on Saturday, and I get it, and I understand it, and it's a very interesting thing. It had been a rare and ominous sight to watch the President of the United States get airlifted to Walter Reed National Military Medical Center to be treated for a disease that killed more than 210,000 Americans and sickened millions more. Laid low by the very virus that has constantly downplayed, and with more than a dozen White House Republican officials around him also being affected. Trump's message, not only urging Americans not to be afraid of the deadly illness, but promising that they are going to beat it if they are infected, was met with disbelief by many doctors and health experts who have spent the last 9 months watching patients fight for their lives and die alone. What the president is saying is untrue and irresponsible, said Carlos de Rio, an infectious disease expert at Emory University in Atlanta, tells Times. He's given an impression, I am strong, I made it, you are weak ones that didn't make it. I think it shows a lack of compassion. So real quick, talking about that statement, I don't want to seem like I am a 100% Trump fan on my podcast or on my channel, because in general I try to understand everything from both sides, and as I've said many times, most often what's right is in the middle. So between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, if you can manufacture a candidate, that person would probably be what's best for America at this time. But obviously we can't do that, and we only have 2 options to choose. But at the same time, media makes it so difficult to stay fair when it comes to covering Trump, because anything Trump says ultimately gets taken at 100% against Trump. And whatever he says, there has only been a very few amount of instances where Donald Trump has been praised by the media, or at least talked about good by the media and sites. And one of those was about COVID with the governors, I believe even the New York governor, saying that Donald Trump has done good and with information and whatever else, and basically telling Donald Trump that he's done a good job, at least on this part of being president. But just anything that Donald Trump says gets taken 100% against him, and you could see that with just his simple comments. He's basically, when we're reading the quote about Donald Trump's return, saying that you are going to beat it, they ultimately take it as him saying that everybody's weak and he's strong. That just seems far stretched to me. I just think he's trying to say, look, if I beat it, you can beat it. I take it to the complete opposite direction to what the mass media took it and all of that. I don't know if that's just me being odd or taking the quote a little bit too far, or not being fair, because I do try to be fair, but we're all human. We all have human nature. And when it comes to mass media coverage of Trump, I tend to fall on the complete opposite side most of the time, just from my anger about what mass media does in general and how they cover news. But I do still try to stay fair and try to understand whatever the middle ground is, because again, I find that to be what's most often right. So it talks a little bit more about COVID and Trump, and ultimately just taking what Donald Trump says to a complete opposite direction. And I didn't really want to cover this news too much, because honestly, I don't find it to be that interesting when it comes to politics happening right now. Obviously, it has a tremendous impact on Donald Trump's campaign and all of his strategies from now on. And I do think that does have a big impact, as I've said. But also, I think that we could potentially be dealing with several different types of concerns with Trump and COVID-19. Obviously, now that Trump has COVID-19, I do think that there's potential that people could see Trump as different, or an individual that since he's had COVID now, he has more experience with it, and he might be able to understand the coronavirus more, or whatever verbiage you want to use there. So I do think that COVID does have potential to help Donald Trump and his claims and what he tends to do from now on. but I don't know if I believe that 100% to be true. And there really hasn't been that much coverage of Donald Trump and his campaign since he's had COVID. So there's really not much to cover from that perspective. I do think that this has a tremendous impact on Donald Trump and his campaign, because as I've said, he's a showman. He's somebody that likes to have large crowds of people, and he's somebody that has managed in his career to gather large crowds of people. So the fact that he can't do that through having COVID-19 and have to wait 2 weeks before he could even probably have a public event because of CDC guidelines and everything like that, I do think that hurts his campaign and in how he tends to manage. But his hardcore supporters are still going to be voting for Donald Trump. We're more arguing about the middle ground, and we're going to talk about these middle ground people at the end of the podcast, because I do think I have a couple of different thoughts, or at least further thoughts on what I've had before. But before we cover this next topic, I'll take a quick drink break. Alrighty, so this next one is just evil at a whole bunch of levels. So, Actual Justice Warrior, and I talk about his channel a lot because I watch his videos very regularly. It's not often that I miss a video from his, at least in the past probably like 3 or 4 months. I don't think I've really missed a video from Actual Justice Warrior and his coverage about all of what is happening right now. And he did a recent video talking about the vice president in general, talking about first ladies in general, as well as Melania Trump and the recent coverage she's found herself in within the news. Excuse me. So his thoughts about the first lady was that they're not very important. We shouldn't really be following their careers. We shouldn't be going crazy because the first lady was not the person we decided to vote for, but the president was what we decided to vote for. The first lady just obviously comes with the president through being his wife. And he mentioned about Hillary Clinton basically being co-president in quotations with Bill Clinton as her husband and as president. And then of course he mentioned Michelle Obama and her legacy with President Obama through there. But he in general, his stance was that the first lady shouldn't be somebody we pay that much attention to. But that being said, he thought it was very interesting about this recent coverage. I'm just going to read this CNN headline by Caroline Kelly, and then I'll give my general thoughts before we get into the article. Secretly recorded tapes show Melania Trump's frustration at criticism for family separation policy and their bashing of Christmas decorations. So the real quick 2 words in that headline are secretly recorded. So these... Let me just give a summary of what happened, and we'll go from there. So one of her friends, in quotations, was having a conversation with the First Lady, Melania Trump, through the telephone, and she was recording their message in hopes to sell it to CNN as a major news story within the Trump campaign and within the presidential race for 1 month before we cast our votes in the election. It could be huge if these secretly recorded tapes had anything super detrimental to Trump or to Trump's campaign through, tax returns or maybe hiding something or whatever, secretly recorded. I go back to those 2 words when reading this article or when summarizing this event. So she was asking multiple questions to the First Lady in more of a conversational type of tone, because it was a phone conversation and she didn't want her to think that she was being recorded. So it was a very conversational type of tone. But that being set aside, there was many things about really Melania Trump just ranting about her position on the White House and about efforts and about, in general, the media just bashing Trump. And there was a lot of claims. And she had a claim that I'll play after I read this article, talking about why she didn't want to put up Christmas decorations for that whole thing. And obviously, when you think of a secretly recorded phone or conversation with Melania Trump, the first lady of Donald Trump, who is very outspoken, well, Donald Trump is outspoken, you think that these secretly recorded phone conversations that CNN is going to talk about and record are going to lead to something huge, something detrimental to Donald Trump's campaign. And this is just besides the point. This just didn't happen. This was a complete no story, because the only thing that the mass media coverage was able to come up with was Christmas decorations. And Christmas decorations are obviously not that concerning when it comes to all of the presidents. And we'll listen to the clip and read the article about why CNN might think these Christmas decorations are detrimental, are huge to the presidential race. But we'll go from there. First Lady Melania Trump was secretly recorded in the summer of 2018, expressing her frustration at being criticized for her husband's policy of separating families who legally cross the southern border, while at the same time needing to perform traditional First Lady duties, such as preparing for Christmas. They say I'm complicit. I am the same like him. I support him. I don't say enough. I don't do enough. Where am I? She said in a tape secretly recorded by Stephanie Whitson-Wolkoff, a former friend and senior advisor to the First Lady, who wrote a book about the relationship, Melania and me. The tapes were played exclusively on CNN Anderson Cooper's 360 on Thursday night and were recorded by Wolkoff after she left the White House. I'm working my ass off on Christmas stuff. You know who gives a about Christmas stuff and decorations, but I need to do it, right? She continued, okay, then I do it. I say I'm working on Christmas and planning for the Christmas. And they said, oh, what about the children that were separated? Give me a freaking break. What they were saying, anything when Obama did that, I cannot go. I was trying to get kid reunited with the mom. I didn't have a chance. Needs to go through the process and through the law. So a lot of what Melania Trump was talking about in her anti-immigration was a lot of what basically just Republican talking points, or Republican points when it comes to immigration. Really what she said wasn't that crazy and wasn't that outstream. We've had the continuous story about Donald Trump and cages, and those cages being leaked back all the way to Obama, and that was what Melania's statement about Obama was through there. But I'll just play this clip of the actual coverage, and then we will go from there. It is loading? It is loading? It is loading? While we wait for it to load, I'll give a few other points because I don't want to. Oh, here we go.
You also had a conversation with the First Lady about her role as First Lady and some of her duties, including Christmas at the White House. I want to play that.
They say I'm complicit. I'm the same like him. I support him. I don't say enough. I don't do enough.
No,
where I am, I'm working like a my ass off.
I know.
That Christmas stuff that, who gives a about Christmas stuff and decoration, but I need to do it, right?
Yeah, but
correct?
100%. You have no choice.
And then I do it, and I say that I'm working on Christmas, planning for the Christmas, and they said, oh, what about the children that they were separated? Give me a break. Where they were saying anything when Obama did that?
I know.
I cannot go. I was trying to get the kid reunited with the mom. I didn't have a chance. Needs to go through the process and through the law.
But here's my thing. Hear what you just said. But instead of that, if your messaging, you were so loved.
They would not do the story. We put it out. They would not do the story.
I'm telling you.
You would not believe it. They would not do the story because they would not do the story because they are against us because they're liberal media. Yeah, if I go to Fox, they will do the story. I don't want to go to Fox.
It's so interesting. I mean,
And they had several talking points from the show, but I'm not going to play the full clip. Again, you can go to the full clip in my Discord after I finish here, as it will be posted in one of the channels on my Discord. if you do want to listen to the whole video or read the whole stance. But the whole thing about Melania Trump just makes her seem kind of like a badass character, because she was willing to kind of stand up against the person without really even knowing it. The fact that she was secretly recorded and a so-called friend of Melania Trump, somebody that wrote a book alongside someone. Books take a very long time, and the fact that this person was able to write a book alongside Melania Trump, and still she wanted to secretly record her, is just absurd, and just kind of whatever the word for not a friend is, that fits that kind of synonym better than just saying not a friend. But that is just harsh, very mean, and I just thought I would talk about that briefly before we get into really the main part of today's podcast. And I'm sure after I finish here, I'll think of a couple of dots from what I've had yesterday and what I've had this morning about the whole Melania Trump tapes. But really, it just goes back to what Trump has had to deal with and what Kavanaugh had to deal with in his hearings and all of those events, about just people not being truthful, and it just is rather harmful. And obviously we haven't heard that much stuff about Melania Trump, and if you're somebody like Actual Justice Warrior, you are rather happy not hearing much from the First Lady. Although the First Lady does have a task, they don't necessarily need to be heard 100% of the time. So now we'll get into the main part of today's podcast, and that is the Vice President debates. So I had a whole probably like 45 minute conversation on my last podcast just about the presidential debates and all of the absurd events that happened from it. We all know that these debates were not very structured and were very foolish and just didn't really fit the average event of what a debate should be. And it was rather harmful to the American people, for anybody that was wanting to learn about these presidential candidates. And that is something that we need to account for. But with these vice president debates, that was completely the opposite of what we had. So the vice president debates happened obviously last night, and that's why I chose to wait to do my podcast Thursday like I did last week. But the vice president debates were very civil for the most part, and in general their talking points weren't exactly 100% interesting, but at the same time they had a good perspective for some of their points, and there were several talking points throughout the debate that many people can take away from, especially some Twitter type of moments with Kamala Harris and her one-liner type of statements that then get made into memes or GIFs, and general like, yes, go, you know, that type of whole political events. But we'll read this first NPR article about 4 takeaways from the presidential debate by Ms. Walsh here. The first one: the 2020 election still hinges on the coronavirus. From the onset of the debate, the pandemic was center stage. Spectators were warned not to remove their masks. The candidates sat at desks more than 12 feet apart and separated by plexiglass shields. It was also the first topic. Harris was aggressive, seizing on the Democrats' ticket center agreement that the Trump administration handling of the novel coronavirus was the greatest failure of any presidential administration in the history of the country. She accused the president of covering up information about the virus when he was briefed in January by his national security team, and she argued that Trump still didn't have a plan to combat the disease. Pense defended the president's record and pointed to Trump's decision to restrict travel on China at the end of January as evidence that he took threat seriously. He noted that the Biden-Harris team planned to address the coronavirus with testing and the development of vaccine, mirrored actions the administration has already taken. It looks a bit like plagiarism, Pense said. So obviously the first question, as they mentioned, was coronavirus. And we all knew that coronavirus was going to be brought up in the debate. And obviously it was with the first image in the debate. And that's something that I don't think many people were very surprised about. And one of the one-liner statements that I mentioned about Kamala Harris was what we just read about calling it the worst thing about the whole event. Sorry about that. The whole event from there. But there's not really that much stuff to talk about coronavirus, because really I'm kind of tired of talking about coronavirus. And second, we all know their stances on coronavirus with Pence and Trump's campaign and Kamala Harris and Biden's campaign. There are actual debates this time, but not necessarily answers to moderators' questions. See, that was a big thing. There was a lot of questions, and I thought the questions were better than the first debate, because the first debate had several questions that almost seemed targeted at the candidates and made for just conversational talk throughout the entire stage for the presidential debate. And the vice presidential questions, I thought, were a lot more civil in nature and just better questions than the first debate had. And I do think that as the headline reads here, but there were several moments, mainly with Kamala Harris, that I saw. I'm sure Pence had moments too, but where Kamala Harris was essentially just avoiding the question or just not answering the question and having a whole 3-minute speech about something entirely different, or something kind of related but not the actual question that the moderator asked. The third one, candidates' strategies reflected on the state of the campaign. Pence attacked Biden-Harris as extreme. Harris pivoted to Trump's record on the coronavirus. So again, we all know that Kamala Harris was attacking the Trump's campaign on coronavirus, because coronavirus has been a huge topic from the debates and everything, or in America right now, because several people say that Trump mismanaged the virus, but at the same time, we don't know what any other president would have necessarily done about the coronavirus, because it was something that was relatively new, even though there has been instances like it. And even Pence mentioned the swine flu, or the swine disease, can't remember which one it is right now, in the fact that how many people it killed. So we'll read here by by New York Times, a former newspaper, as Ed says, and I believe Ed took that from someone else, but I don't know where he took it, so. Stop. Okay, here we go. During most campaigns, the job of the vice president candidate focuses on boosting the person's heading the ticket. Proving their sustainability for the top job is secondary. But this year is different. The president is 74 and spent much of the past week in a hospital, and his Democratic rival is 77. So it was vital for the running mates, Vice President Mike Pence and Senator Kamala Harris, to show in Wednesday night's debate that they can be capable by stepping up if necessary. That was a big point that a lot of people and content creators were making about the vice president debate. And that was essentially, this debate could have such a huge meaning on the election, this election, because both candidates are older. And really at the time, a lot of people are saying that Joe Biden has health conditions or has some sort of health-related problem that makes it seem like there's a concern for why he wouldn't be able to be president for all of the term, or be president for the moments where he would need to be president. In other words, there is a lot of health concerns around Joe Biden, and the fact that he wasn't going to be able to hold up as president or be a good president due to his health concern. And now that Donald Trump has gone to the hospital from coronavirus, there's now concerns about Donald Trump's health. So now Vice President Mike Pence has to react on those moments as well. And this is from the New York Times as well, as it says, a fly set atop Mike Pence's head for 2 minutes during the VP debate. President Trump's handling of the country was elephant in the room during Wednesday's vice presidential debate. Or President Trump. What? But it was a fly taking a brief break from flying that couldn't be ignored by viewers watching the event from home. Vice President Mike Pence, his hair perfectly cuffed, never reacted to the fly's appearance on the right side of his head. It stood out against its bright white hair, standing still for most part of the moving around slightly before, flying away. A local TV news reporter from California clocked the fly's screen time on Mike Pence's head at 2 minutes and 3 seconds. While Mr. Pence spent most of the 90-minute debate avoiding direct questions posed by the moderator, Susan Page by USA Today, the fly brought up a slew of questions of its own. So will the play on Fly on Saturday Night Live? Pete Davidson seems like a good choice. It is able to catch the coronavirus that was affected so many top Trump administration officials. And then Joe Biden then had a tweet that says, pitch in $5 to help this campaign fly, and it had Joe Biden with a fly swatter, which is rather funny and actually a pretty good comedy, and I don't think many people would see that happening very much from a Joe Biden campaign. So it was very funny to see. This next one is Trump vows not to participate in a virtual debate with Biden. So I decided to include this here next to all of the debate news. And obviously, if you talk about my points, I don't know if I necessarily have a lot of points that I took away from the debate, from the vice president debate like I had the first time around. Really, a lot of their points were kind of standard and didn't really add anything to the debate stage or something that I didn't already know. So although I watched it and thought it was more civil, and I think if the average viewer were to watch it, they would see it as more civil too. But at the same time, I don't know if I necessarily have anything extra to add. I thought that Mike Pence, I guess in general, was a little bit more lively than I thought he was going to be. Because in general, he is that very Christian, conservative, well-spoken, soft-spoken older man. Well, Kamala Harris, I thought was going to be very vicious and very attacking, a hound dog type of thing. And in general, that was the case. But I do think that Pence was a little bit more lively in the debate than I thought he was going to be. Trump vows not to participate in a virtual debate with Biden. President Trump vowed Thursday to skip next week's debate with Democratic nominee Joe Biden after organizers said it would be held virtually because of the president's COVID-19 diagnosis. More evidence that the race will be defined by the coronavirus despite the White House's attempt to make it about almost anything else. I'm not going to do a virtual debate, Trump told Fox Business anchor Mario moments after the nonpartisan Commission on Presidential Debates announced the changes. Biden's campaign insisted its candidate was ready to move forward with the second presidential debate next Thursday in Miami, but the future of the event is now in serious doubt. The commission made the decision unilaterally, citing the need to protect the health and safety of all involved with the second presidential debate. A person familiar with the matter said some associated with the production of the debate number 2 raised safety concerns after Trump tested positive for the virus following the first debate last week in Cleveland. So the big thing about Donald Trump is Donald Trump does have charisma when it comes to the debate stage, but that's when he has someone to talk to. And Trump is a very good person at being able to read human energy or feel how people are feeling around him. But if he's just in front of a camera or just in front of a camera with no one else really there, he becomes almost very stoic. And we all kind of change when we get in front of a camera because it's different than having to talk to somebody who's standing in front of you or just talking to someone in general. So I don't think that Trump necessarily wants to do that because he will lose a lot of his fieriness from the debate stage. But this is kind of new, and I do think that there's potential for Donald Trump to agree to something virtual if he needs to. Knowing President Trump, he probably is not going to change to something virtual just for the fact of him being his bullish type of nature and knowing what he wants and all of that. So I'll check comment section real quick just in case I haven't missed anything from the comments. Nothing here. Nothing here. Nothing here. And probably nothing here. Nope. Okay, we are looking good. Alrighty. So this next thing we're talking about is with celebrities, and I wanted to start with something kind of neutral, and we've seen these type of celebrity endorsements throughout this debate stage, or really not the debate stage, but election stage for each of the candidates. But we have a new one with Taylor Swift now endorsing Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and this is by the Rolling Stone. Taylor Swift is voting Democrat presidential candidate Joe Biden and running mate Kamala Harris on November 3rd. On Wednesday, ahead of the vice presidential debate, V Magazine shared an article featuring the pop star, which appears in its Thought Leaders issue. The change we need is to elect a president who recognizes that people of color deserve to feel safe and represented, that women deserve the right to choose what happens to their bodies, and that the LGBTQIA, wait a second, they changed it again? There's IA now? I missed that. Plus community deserves to be acknowledged and included, Swift told the V Magazine. Everyone deserves a government that takes a global health risk seriously and puts the lives of its people first. The only way we begin to make things better is to choose leaders who are willing to face these issues and find ways to work through them. I will proudly vote for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in this year's presidential election, she continued. Under their leadership, I believe America has a chance to start the healing process it so desperately needs. So obviously when it comes to elections and all of that, we know that a lot of celebrities are going to be voting for the Democratic candidate. And I just thought it was interesting that she mentioned race and LGBTQIA+. I think I got that right. in her reason for voting for Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. But that's not really that shocking. And we know that Taylor Swift has been somebody that used to be kind of conservative in nature. She made country music. Her dad was in the music industry as well. And she was just kind of that hometown chick you could kind of relate to, you know, somebody that was rather interesting. But then she took a spin more towards pop country, new country is kind of what I call it. And then she just totally went into pop. And I believe it was a couple elections ago, or it was her local election, so it must have been either 2 or 4 years ago, where she endorsed a Democratic candidate for like the first time, or at least publicly endorsed a Democratic candidate for the first time. And it kind of shocked everybody, because in general, people didn't really see that as Taylor Swift happening, but she kind of changed everything. So this is a tweet from her. She said, I spoke to at V Magazine about why I'll be voting for Joe Biden for president. It's come out on the night of the VP debate. Gonna be watching and supporting Kamala Harris by yelling at the TV a lot, and I have custom cookies. And then she has Biden Harris 2020 cookies that she made, or one of her friends made for her. But the big thing about celebrity news that I wanted to talk to, and normally I don't really cover that much about celebrity news because it doesn't really interest me that much when it comes to who celebrities want to endorse, because we already kind of know who they want to endorse and their reasons ultimately for doing so. But some celebrities decided to make a campaign ad about naked ballots, and essentially naked ballots are when someone misses a step of filling out their ballot sheet. So when you have a ballot sheet, you have to sign several components and have to fit it into a bigger letter within something else in order to conceal your vote, so that the person who tallies up these ballots knows that this ballot itself wasn't tampered with. So if you don't do a step, or you essentially just slide in a ballot that doesn't have anything in it, it could potentially be changed or have fraud to do with it, or just be not counted if you actually did do the steps but failed to do every step. So there's this ad on YouTube about naked celebrities that wanted to have an important message for people about naked ballots, and they go on to talk a little bit about what a naked ballot is and why you should be careful when filling out your ballot sheet. And obviously that is a good point to have. And mostly this was targeted at Pennsylvania, which is a swing state that Joe Biden tends to have an advantage for so far, if you believe polling numbers. But with all the fracking news, if you believe Ben Shapiro, it is going to be a vote for Donald Trump, just for the fact that people who are in the oil industry in Pennsylvania will not want to vote for the opposite approach in fear of losing their job. So several celebrities, including Amy Schumer, Chris Walk, Sarah Silverton, Tiffany Haddish, Mark Ruffalo, Josh Gad, Chelsea Handler, Naomi Campbell, Ryan Mitchell, Josh Schiller, and Sacha Baron Cohen. I think I said that right. Anyway, they made this whole ad, and I'm not going to be able to play it because of YouTube and TOS and all of their Twitch and all those. They're not going to want this to be shown, despite it being on YouTube already. But anyway, we all know the copyright stuff, and that's kind of besides the point. But I thought I would briefly mention that because it is kind of funny now that celebrities can't make movies now because their movie studios have all been shut down and whatever else. They are now deciding to make a political ad and be naked in it. It's just kind of rather bizarre. But they are not the only one to decide to be naked in a political ad about the same issue. Some Pennsylvania politicians decide to go topless in warning voters about mail-in and naked ballots. And this is by Joanna Walters and The Guardian. Bethany Hallman, through the best way to dress up her message that voters are in danger of not being counted in the vile swing state of Pennsylvania, was to strip down to the basics. So she did, literally. Do you want to get naked to save democracy? Follow Galena County Councilman Olivia Bennett, and Hallman asked her a few days ago. I said okay, Bennett recalled, laughing. The two councilwomen recruited a third badass state representative elective, Emily Kincaid, and posed for the camera. She added their clothes and then posted the results on social media with their breasts hidden behind messages, secret envelope being sent to Pennsylvania along with their ballots for postal voting. If voters mail in their ballots without putting it first in a secret envelope and then putting that inside the outer addressed envelope, the authorized will not count the vote and it will be discarded as a naked ballot. So Hallman and her allies wanted to warn voters on that fact or of that threat. And it has pictures of their campaign, and they have their 3 government women lined up in the steps for how you fill out a ballot. So again, it's kind of the same sort of thing, and they're deciding to go naked in showing the basics. And obviously as an ad, it works as a shock value. And many ads are good to have a shock value because regardless of what you necessarily think about the message, it does get your attention, and that's partly why I'm talking about it now. But I don't know if it's necessarily that good for the whole thing. And Hello Ed, he says, I will tamper with your ballot. And then you put, I can't be bothered to care about naked celebrities unless it's Ashley Tisdale, I think Tisdale. Yeah, that's I don't know. Celebrities are just funny to me. That's why I wanted to include it for this one. And obviously I can't really show the message, but anyway, neither do I really want to see it, to be honest. But this next thing, this next thing is about protests. And protests have happened continuously for a very long time now. And they're continuously happening. There are 2 events of protest that are happening basically now. You have the protest on the streets with the George Floyd officer being released in Eric Chauvin, and this is by CNN News and Elliot C. Protesters relayed Wednesday night in Minneapolis to express outrage over the release of Derek Chauvin, the ex-Minneapolis police officer charged with the death of George Floyd. Chauvin faces counts of second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter in Floyd's May 25th killing. Video captured Chauvin kneeling on Floyd's neck for almost 8 minutes as Floyd told him and 3 other officers he couldn't breathe. Chauvin posted bond on $1 million bail Wednesday. Court records indicate I can confirm he is no longer in our custody, said Sarah Fitzgerald, spokeswoman for the Minnesota Department of Corrections. According to WCCO, hundreds of mostly peaceful mostly peaceful. That word now, when being associated to protest, is just tiring, because either your protest is peaceful or it's not peaceful. There's no in between when it comes to protests. Effective protests are peaceful, ineffective protests are not peaceful. So the fact that there was ineffective protesting due it being not peaceful makes the protest not peaceful. There is no in between with saying mostly peaceful. There is not mostly peaceful when it comes to protest. And obviously, the fact of him getting released and all of the news, because all of these protests started from the George Floyd killing. And when you see the video, you do see it as being an outright murder. And many people thought that way. I thought that way for a long time. But then you always have to think about, well, what's the opposite side? Although it may be weird to think that there's an opposite side to an event such as that, where we saw an officer kneeling on his neck. Then we learned that it was proper procedure, even though he may have done it for too long or done it slightly wrong. It was still their procedure. Then we learned about the transcript that got released from the body cam, and then we got extra body cam footage. Then we got extra news with witnesses and whatever else that George Floyd had systems of a drug in his body, making him more hyped up and making him not be able to breathe despite the officers doing nothing, and the fact that he wanted to be on the ground, and all these other facts that we learned about the incident. It's not cut and dry. And many people knew that this officer was potentially going to be released, or at least charged with a lot less crimes than what people were originally wanting. But if you're someone that just believes what the mass media coverage tells you and reads this article 100% and takes every note of its article as fact, you are going to be outraged by this officer getting released in what seemed like an outright murder. But that ignores every other fact to the situation that goes against the original thing you saw in the video. And this case is very complex and very convoluted. So I'm not saying that one side is right and one side is wrong. Again, I go back to whatever is in the middle is most often right. And that is a classic example to this George Floyd. This next one is protests that are happening in New York after more restrictions, after the governor has passed more restrictions about COVID-19, and the fact that there was seemed to be racial tension as well, or at least anti-Semitic attention potentially with this protest. But again, there's a protest in New York happening. Also, Hestic demonstrators, hours after beating an innocent man unconscious and torching protective face masks, surrounded and attacked the reporter as they finally returned to the Brooklyn streets Wednesday to continue the protest. The uneasy feelings from an earlier scary event lingered in a heavily Jewish where local residents faced a daily news photographer to seek revenge inside his car, and police were summoned to defuse a scuffle with a television reporter. I was just brutally assaulted, hit in the head, and kicked at it by an angry crowd of hundreds of community members at the Borough Park protest, while yelling at me Nazi and Hitler after Hushy Tuskler recognized me and ordered the crowd to chase me down the street. And then it goes on to talk a little bit more and have evidence through Twitter and other sites about how many people were physically gathered in this protest. But we are not the only ones experiencing protests, and I'm not going to spend or read too much. I just wanted to show that we are not the only ones experiencing protests around the world about COVID or about their governments passing laws that the citizens don't necessarily want to follow or see as being civil. There are protests in Indonesia over job loss in relation to COVID-19 and government restrictions and whatever else. So again, I'm not really going to read this article, but I did want to include it just for the fact of saying that these protests are almost worldwide, despite really the United States seeming to have the brunt use of protests and everything. But before I move to this last topic, I didn't want to spend too much time on protests because really protests just seem rather sad to me. I don't really see why people are interested in protesting in all of these events, especially when it comes to the events that they are protesting of. Now, obviously, people have a right to their opinion and the right to protest. mainly protesting peaceful, but the fact that these protests are continuously happening is just tiring and just kind of sad. Now, as I've said, I'm going to end my podcast every week on this last segment about polling numbers. And if you want to summarize this whole segment, you could summarize it by basically saying, if you believe polls, especially as if you believe polls, and if you believe the latest numbers of polls, Biden has the win, hands down. Biden's got it. There is no doubt that Biden is going to win. But where have we heard that story before? We heard that story with Hillary Clinton in the last election with Donald Trump. And 538 had the most accurate results. That's why I always continue to use them on this segment. But I also find their articles very interesting because they are insightful, and I see them not necessarily being 100% biased or having a biased slant as other news sources are. So that's why I always continuously to go back to 538 to see their analysis. And 538's got a article here that says Biden got some of his best polls this week. After Democrats' great midterm election, the 2020 election could be the second consecutive Democratic wave. According to 538's forecast, Joe Biden has an 84 in 100 chance of winning the presidential election. Democrats have a 68 in 100 chance of flipping the Senate, and the party has a 94 in 100 chance of keeping the House, although there is a 65 in 100 chance that Democrats will have full control of the federal government next year. That is a scary thought. Democrats' hopes and Republicans' fears for another blue wave grow this week with the release of several polls that were among Biden's best for the entire year. It's hard to tell exactly why this is happening, given all of the news the past couple weeks, but no matter how you slice it, it's not good for President Trump. For instance, a national poll by NCN SSRS gave Biden an eye-popping 16-point lead among likely voters. Monmouth University also gave Biden an 11-point lead in Pennsylvania in a high turnout scenario and an 8-point lead in a low turnout scenario. Quinnipiac University backed that up with its own Pennsylvania poll showing that Biden up by 13 points and added a Biden plus 11 Florida poll and a Biden plus 5 Iowa poll for good measure. And then it goes here to show some results for Florida, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Iowa, Ohio, North Carolina, Nevada, Arizona, Minnesota, Michigan, Wisconsin, Texas, and Texas is Republican, but all of the others that I said are positive, are not positive, but are are Democratic leaning. This next topic is that Biden is leading Trump in Nevada, and two other states are near a tie. And this is again by the New York Times, the former newspaper. And it states here, Joseph R. Biden maintains a steady lead over President Trump in Nevada, and two are virtually tied in Ohio, as voters continue to express dissatisfaction with the president's handling of the coronavirus pandemic, according to new polls. I feel like some raindrops. Alright, I'm going to summarize this real quick, and then I'll summarize the last two articles, and then we'll get out of here real quick, because I do not want this tech to get wet and to get ruined from that point on. So, this article talks about how Nevada, Biden has a +6 lead, and in Ohio, Biden has a plus, about how the gender from men and women are about the same, with 69% and 60% leaning towards a Democratic vote. And then the next article I was going to read and talk about was the Electoral College. And right now the article is saying that Biden is going to win the Electoral College, which would be huge because a lot of people say that Trump's only chance, if you believe polls, to win the election is through the Electoral College. Then the last article I was going to talk about was about Harris and her that her presidential debate wasn't 100% good because it led people who were undecided to see her as more a bullish bulldog rather than somebody that was more civil with somebody in a vice president candidate you would want to have. Again, I'm sorry I had to round this episode quick as well. I just find it better to do these podcasts outside and inside because the dorm room does have a slight echo, and I don't really think that's very good for the audio quality of the podcast because, again, this is a podcast, so the audio is the most important thing from all of this. So I'm sorry I had to round it up real quickly. Again, thank you for watching live, Ed, on YouTube, and for everyone else who might catch this show later on my D Live or Twitch at The Breakdown with WB, on my YouTube at The Breakdown with Berckenhoff. And thank you for those who are watching now or on the podcast with Apple or Spotify, whatever else you might find your podcast. Again, thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.